I'm Tom Neale, the co-founder and president of the Jefferson Society. I'm introducing Adam Andrzejewski because the Jefferson Council has partnered with Adam and his organization in a deep dive series that you've likely seen in national news, uncovering UVA's expansive DEI program. He'll give the details. I'll just tell you the administration claims it's $5 million. Adam can prove it's $20 million and growing. So much for the honor code at UVA. Adam is the CEO founder of Open the Book, books.com. It's a private, nonpartisan, nonprofit government watchdog organization. Open the Book shines a white-hot spotlight on exactly how hard-earned tax dollars are spent by the government, federal, state, and local. Last year, Adam's group filed 55,000 FOIA requests and captured nearly every dime taxed and spent at every level of government. This was across the country, and you can search all of it at absolutely no cost on the website openthebooks.com. Since 2018, his investigations have racked up 45,000 media citations. Adam's work has been featured on the BBC, Good Morning America, ABC World News, Tonight, C-SPAN, The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, USA Today, Fox News, CNN, National Public Radio, Forbes, Newsweek, and many other national media. Adam is an entrepreneur. Before he dedicated his life to public service, he co-founded HomePages Directories, a $20 million publishing company. He lives in Hinsdale, Illinois, with his wife, Carrie, and 3 teenage daughters. He's a lecturer at his local Catholic church and has finished the Chicago Marathon 8 times. One word you will never hear applied to him is slacker. So, Adam?
Good morning. Tom, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's been a real privilege to fight in the same trench, locked arm in arm with the Jefferson Council at UVA, and you're going to hear about that battle today. First off, I just want to say thank you to the Council, the Alliance, members, guests, directors. Thank you for this opportunity for us today to share our mission and vision. And just a point of personal privilege, I just want to point out, we at openthebooks.com, we have a very dedicated, hardworking staff. We have 2 of our directors here in the room with us today, our development director, Courtney Lyons, and one of our top journalists. She's a deputy policy director with us, Rachel O'Brien, who's been tip of the spear on a lot of the DEI research that we've done at openthebooks.com. So they join us here today. As many of you know, I'm from Illinois. It is the Super Bowl of corruption. On public policy and politics, if anything happens for the good of the people, it's entirely by accident. Our governors are famous for the corruption. As a matter of fact, in one recent period, 4 out of our last 9 governors had served time in the federal penitentiary. 2013 was a bad year. We had 2 Illinois governors, 1 from each party, Democrat Rod Blagojevich and Republican George Ryan in the federal pen at the same time. In 2014, and this is how bad it is, I investigated my local junior college, the College of DuPage. It was actually the 2nd largest college on enrollment in my state. And here's what we found. We knew the incumbent governor, Pat Quinn. He's one of the ones that didn't go to jail. He was coming to campus to deliver the commencement address. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the College of DuPage board president for his emails. And we unearthed an email on pay to play to bring political support ahead of the election to the incumbent governor during that commencement experience, during graduation, to try to unlock, shake loose a $20 million construction grant for a building that had already been completed. When we unearthed that email, we stopped that $20 million grant. We didn't stop at the College of DuPage. What we found was over the course of 5 years, they spent $600 million rebuilding the entire physical plant on campus. And they built more office space for the administrators than classroom space for the students. They actually built an upscale French restaurant complete with a world-class wine cellar and hired a French sommelier. They said they were transparent with every dollar of spending, but we found a hidden, impressed petty cash fund where they pushed over a 5-year period $100 million through. And how much corruption in Illinois can you find in $100 million? We found that the president's country club dues were paid through that fund, and it wasn't in his contract. When he went to Africa and shot an African elephant, He billed off trip expenses, including his global satellite phones. They spent, through that fund, $250,000, $250,000 on wine and wine accessories billed off as instructional supplies. They actually then opened up private house accounts and billed off $300,000 for their own private dining in their French restaurant. We also found that the chief radio station engineer would break equipment at the radio station and on a no-bid basis contract with his own radio station equipment company to the tune of $400,000. And when we exposed that, the local state's attorney indicted him. He pled guilty, had to pay back $400,000 in restitution, was sentenced to 8 years in the state penitentiary, and was stripped of his state pension. There was an election, a new board was elected, and they cut property taxes, they cut student tuition for the first time in 15 years, and that's the corruption tax in Illinois. They also fired the comptroller, the treasurer, and the president, and that's the power of transparency. When we fight on hard facts, we can win. And look, when we started that investigation, we had one good trustee, Kathy Hamilton. She was a stay-at-home mom that decided to run for trustee, and she won with the most votes in the history of those board elections at that school, against 6 bad trustees. It takes one candle to light a dark room. It takes one person to stand up and say they had enough, and that's the power of what we can do together. If we fight on hard data, if we take a stand, we can win. And at openthebooks.com, we give you the tools to be able to be successful. This is kind of incredible. Over the course of the last 5 years, our team has filed 250,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. It's the most in American history. For the first time in history, we've compiled virtually every single dollar taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country. And you can search it all actually for free from our website at openthebooks.com. And we spent $7 million to pioneer the latest in technologies. It's AI, it's Benjamin the chatbot, and with 4 easy questions, you can follow the money for the first time in history. We've unsiloed all of it. I'm talking federal level, state level, and local level across the entire country, the entire public spend complex. 25 million public employee salary and pension records, all the vendor spending in the 50 states, the federal checkbook, and 18,000 substantial units of government across the country. This is historic. So you can stand up, fight on hard facts, and use Benjamin and open the books to fuel the battle. Not only do we open the books, we audit them, and the audits make national news. I want to take you back to 2017. In 2017, we came out with an oversight report called Ivy League Inc. And here's what we found. We found that the 8 schools of the Ivy League over a 6-year period at taxpayer cost, their subsidies, their federal contracts and grants, and their special tax treatment amounted to $42 billion. If the Ivies were a state government on the federal receipt of funds into state governments, the Ivy League would outrank 16 states. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of power. On federal contracts and grants, we proved that the Ivy League is now more federal contractor than they are educator. They collect more on federal contracts and grants than what students and parents pay on undergraduate student tuition. And much of it is waste. We found Columbia took nearly $6 million on a project. It was a game called Future Coast, which is very boring. Nobody played it. It's creating fake voicemails from the future. From the year 2065, after the world's been decimated by climate change. And it doesn't take $1 million or $6 million. You could have done it with the memo function on your iPhone. We found Cornell University took $1 million grant. Where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. Turns out it's the nostril. I read the study. The guy stung himself everywhere. It's incredible. This had real-world impact. You know, in 2017, by the end of the year, after we broke this study at the Wall Street Journal on the editorial page, Fox News ran it wall-to-wall for months, that Congress, President signed it on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. They instituted a first-ever excessive endowment tax on the wealthy universities. It was 1.4%, but it set precedent. For the first time ever, the wealthy universities, in some capacity, were going to be held accountable. And I want you to know that after 10/7, we updated that report. Not only did we have the 8 schools at the Ivy League, but we added Northwestern and Stanford into that mix. And here's our findings. In the latest 5-year period, those 10 schools at taxpayer cost, their subsidies, federal contracts and grants, and special tax treatment amounted to $45 billion. You and I, as taxpayers, have a significant stake in these private IRS 501c3 educational charities. As a matter of fact, here's their strategy. While they funded their research operations on the back of all of us as taxpayers, their endowments ballooned. So those 10 schools have a collective endowment today of $240 billion. They take the private donations, they stuff their endowments, they offload all of their research on the back of taxpayers, and everybody in the academy is getting rich. And all of us have a significant stake in this. And I think all of us are rightly distressed at the civil unrest on these campuses, and we should be alarmed that we have such a big stake on these campuses. Because if there's one principle that we can all agree on, is not one single taxpayer dollar should go to an entity that coddles bigotry, discrimination, and anti-Semitism. So Congress needs to hold hearings. They need to hold these institutions accountable. But it's not only about taxpayer support of these universities. At openthebooks.com, over the course of the last 30 days, we've followed the money on foreign funding into these elite universities. And you remember the great education secretary, Betsy DeVos. In the early years of the Trump administration, they were very concerned about Chinese influence. She forced, under the Higher Education Reporting Act, all the colleges to report up, they weren't doing it, their foreign gifts and grants into the federal database. And China was the big story, with the Confucius Institutes, the outposts of spying on 100 college campuses. And if you quantify the Chinese funding into American universities and colleges since 1986, it amounts to $2.8 billion. Under the glare and spotlight of transparency, the Chinese retreated. They closed those 100 Confucius Institutes. So since 1986, there's been $44 billion of foreign gifts and grants into America's higher ed. And 1 out of every $4 has actually flowed from 4 Middle Eastern countries. It's not $2.8 billion, it's $10.3 billion. It's roughly 3 or 4 times what the Chinese put into the system has come from Qatar at $5.3 billion, Saudi Arabia at $3 billion, the UAE at $1.7 billion, and Kuwait at nearly $1 billion. So what type of influence have they been buying on America's colleges and universities? Well, Kuwait is very transparent. They've partnered with 6 of them who've put degree-conferring campuses back in Qatar, with top schools like Cornell Medical School or Georgetown or Northwestern or Texas A&M. Saudi Arabia, they're actually buying seats in the undergraduate and graduate schools across the country. They're actually funding 240 universities from across the country. Here's one example at MIT where Saudi Arabia, since 1986, has put over $115 million into MIT. One couple of the gifts, $7 million, helped them build a new research facility. A separate gift bought Saudi national seats in research positions and fellowships on research projects at MIT. And sure enough, at MIT, 41% of the graduate student body are international students. At Columbia, it's 38%. To the extent that the foreign gifts and grants are buying influence, buying seats at our universities, Congress needs to hold hearings. We need to make sure that our taxpayer-supported institutions are unabashedly American. because it's not only about those 4 Middle Eastern countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait, it's also about the state of Palestine. So this last week we broke the story that Harvard, Brown, and a state university in Pennsylvania had accepted $10 million worth of gifts from the state of Palestine. We thought that was interesting because the US State Department doesn't recognize the state of Palestine, neither does the United Nations. So what did it purchase? So entities in these areas, and keep in mind the state of Palestine is political fiction. It's an area of the world where, they don't share our values. The Palestine Liberation Organization, the Palestinian Authority is supposed to be the moderate organization, but codified into Palestinian law is this gruesome practice of pay to slay, where they pay pensions to the families of dead terrorists who killed Jews, and 500 bureaucrats run that system, and it's 10% of the Palestinian Authority's budget. They don't share our values. So what did Brown spend their $750,000 on? A first ever Palestinian professor. And then they gave him their pick, who was supposed to be moderate, had radical ties. They gave him a 2-year leave. He goes back to Birzeit University in the West Bank near Ramallah. The #1 student organization at that university is Hamas. He spends 2 years there and then comes back to Brown. We need to follow the money. And at openthebooks.com, for all of your universities, you can check out all of the foreign gifts and grants since 1986, because we just put it on an interactive map. You can come to our homepage, scroll down to the map section, and search on a transactional basis as much information that the feds disclose. We have it right there so you can follow the foreign gifts and grants and influence into your university. And here's why it's important. Pre-capture of this information. What happened over the last 2 weeks? The Department of Ed actually pulled down their database of foreign gifts and grants funding. But we've pre-captured it at openthebooks.com so you can follow the money. Okay, so aren't you sick and tired of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Here's why it's so pernicious. Equity is the opposite of equal opportunity. Equity is a quota system. You are judged by the color of your skin, not the content of your character. It is the opposite of Thomas Jefferson's The Jeffersonian Principle, as enshrined in the Watershed Document and the Declaration of Independence, of equal opportunity. Under equity, merit is actually racist. And here's the dirty little secret. Everybody in a position of leadership and authority pushing DEI on your campus, they know this. It's the opposite of America's founding principles, and that's why it's under attack at our most prestigious institutions across the country, including the Department of Defense. We noticed at openthebooks.com last year that the Pentagon's K-12 public schools had opened up a first ever Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with a lot of power. They were involved in every single hiring decision, professional development, the curriculum, the testing of the students. So we investigated deeply, and when Fox News found that the first ever DEI chief, Kalisa Wing, had anti-white tweets, Fox became the exclusive publisher of all of our investigations. And we had a lot of impact. We worked with whistleblowers on military bases from around the world, our congressional allies like Elise Stefanik, Jim Banks, Mike Rogers, who wrote oversight letters to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. And here's the good news, the Pentagon saw it our way. A year ago, in March, ahead of a congressional hearing, they announced that their first ever Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, they were canceling it. They closed it. They reassigned the chief. She no longer works there. And the Pentagon's Undersecretary for Readiness, Gil Cisneros, he no longer works at the Pentagon either, and that's the power of transparency. We can win these fights when we fight on hard facts. Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, they passed the bill. No public funds for DEI in Florida's public universities. So the University of Florida, Ben Sass, Wall Street Journal, they got rid of 28 staffers for $5 million in payroll. So at openthebooks.com, partnering with the Jefferson Council, we wanted to know just how deeply DEI was embedded in Mr. Jefferson's university. So we took the university-provided payroll, and we found 235 staffers, which included 82 students, on payroll costs, including benefits, of $20 million a year. So it wasn't 28 staffers, it was 235, and it wasn't $5 million, it was $20 million. That's the equivalent of 1,000 undergraduate students with their full in-state tuition payment every single year. And woke doesn't mean broke. The top DEI staffers, Kevin McDonald, he runs DEI for the entire UVA system. He made more money than the president made last year on cash compensation. He made $401,000. The chief of the global equity at the prestigious Darden Business School, base salary of $451,000. I mean, the governor, Glenn Youngkin, only makes $175,000. It's embedded in every single department and facet of the university, including the medical school, the engineering school, even the police department. The university pushed back. They said, hey, wait a second, these findings are wildly inflated. Now keep in mind, we released the detail. We released the database, the name, the department, the position title, their title, DE or I, their department under DE or I departments, right? And their salaries, full database release. Not one person out of the 235 has called to say, hey, wait a second, you got me wrong, I'm not a DEI employee. These were the people in the departments and the titles pushing DEI at UVA. But they said, wildly inflated, we have 55. So we asked for their backup file. We asked for their database. And the university spokesman wouldn't provide it. We asked his deputy. He wouldn't respond either. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request for it, and we got our answer. There's no documents that exist. They claim, probably in violation of open records law, that no documents exist on their backup file for their claim number of 55. So you're going to see this break in the national press shortly in a very prestigious think tank academic journal. We've actually extended the argument. It's not 235, it's over 350. Because it's not about position title, as you know, or the payroll figure. It's about those people appointed by the university on DEI, deans, leads, to push, or DEI representatives, to push the concept through every department in the academy. So now we've got an extra 122 appointed DEI leads amongst 80 departments at the University of Virginia. Now, DEI is not their primary task, but they are paid at a cost of benefits another $18.5 million. So you got people at UVA at a total payroll of about $40 million, including benefits, that are pushing the concept. And again, that's a lot of power. Now, you may think that the UVA Division I athletic programs are immune from DEI. No. The assistant athletic director, he's the diversity council member pushing the concept within their sports programs. Okay, so our next investigation that'll break is at University of North Carolina system-wide. Obviously, they've made good decisions. In February, they eliminated the DEI component at UNC on their hiring decisions. Just last week, UNC Chapel Hill said no more taxpayer money for DEI positions, and they say that they'll save and reallocate $2.5 million. Next week, system-wide, the trustees should meet, and they should affirm a recent proposal that they will eliminate DEI system-wide. So our report is important because the policymakers and decision makers need to understand the stakes. We have identified over 800 employees system-wide at UNC that are involved in some capacity in pushing the concept of DEI. They are paid and they are pushing. It's 16 universities, 300 departments, and it also includes 30, which is nearly 2 per school, separate DEI steering committees to push diversity, equity, inclusion into every facet of the academy. We are releasing a full database. So all the decision makers can see exactly who's involved. Name, position title, the department. If they're on payroll with their title of DEI, or if they work in an agency of DEI, that's pretty self-explanatory. And there's 300 of those, but we have 400 employees that are in appointed positions, and then we have a link next to them to the university website where their name actually appears. We have nailed this investigation. It also includes 80 students that have DEI roles, and we weren't able to find 66 in the payroll, probably because the university sites are old and haven't been updated. But the total complex now is that we've identified from university records themselves is 830. And if you add up the payroll that we can see, and if you tack on the cost of benefits, it rivals $100 million a year in the UNC system. And here's what we all know, that all of those researchers, all of those dollars, they're not going to further research, further education. They're draining resources from the complex. They're pushing a concept that is at odds with America's founding principles. I just want to close with the following story. It was about a year ago that the legendary U.S. Senator, Dr. Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, he passed away much too early, cancer. I had the privilege, after he left the United States Senate, he became the honorary chairman of OpenTheBooks.com, and we did many investigations together. And I want to tell you a story about when he left the United States Senate, because Coburn, there was none more fearless. He was the one candle that lit those dark rooms in Congress. They called him Dr. No because 1,000 times he used the Senate rules to stop pork barrel legislation. When he couldn't stop, he embarrassed his colleagues. That's courage. In the collegial Senate, he published the Waste Book Report, identifying the wasteful government spending programs and grants. And he partnered with then U.S. Senator Barack Obama on Obama's only signature piece of legislation to open the federal checkbook to transparency for the first time, and that's the data you and I use to hold everyone accountable. By 2013, by aggressively running transparency and accountability through the United States Senate, Coburn was chosen by Time on their list of the 100 most influential persons in the world. These concepts are powerful. So when Coburn's leaving the Senate, he gave us all a warning. He delivered babies back home in a small town before he went to Congress, 3,000 babies. And he said, on the law of large numbers, sometimes a delivery would get in trouble. And you knew there was a problem when the baby's heartbeat, which is normally 150 to 160 beats a minute, would drop to 50 or 60 beats a minute. Coburn said, at that moment, as the physician, you had 3 minutes. You had 3 minutes to save the life of the baby, to save the life of the mother. And Coburn said you had options. You could go for the forceps and pull the baby out. You could go for the vacuum extractor. You could make the decision to take the mother, put her up on the table, cut a hole in her belly, and take the baby by C-section. But Coburn said the point was you had to take action, and first you had to make a decision. And Coburn said, at this moment in our history, as we approach the 250th anniversary of this great republic, Coburn said, we have to make a decision on our principles and on our values. We have to make a decision, and then we have to take action. At OpenTheBooks.com, we want to be your partner. We want to help you take action. I know you've already made the decision. Thank you very much for having me in.